Hi everyone! So our topic was Navajo language, and we're going to start by describing a little bit about Navajo background in general.
So a little bit about the Navajo geography. What they call the homeland of the Navajo Nation, as you can see on the map, is primarily located in northern Arizona. It also covers parts of southern Utah, northwestern New Mexico, and a very small area of southwestern Colorado. The Navajo population is currently over 300,000 people, but of that 300,000, only 170,000 speak Navajo, and on top of that, 7,600 are monolingual Navajo speakers. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2010 and still now, Navajo is the highest spoken Native American language within the United States. Some kind of interesting facts about children speaking Navajo. In families with two bilingual parents, meaning Navajo and English-speaking parents, children are typically also bilingual. But in families with one monolingual English-speaking parent and one bilingual, Navajo and English parent, children are typically monolingual and only speak English. A little more information about the Navajo language. It was once an only oral language, and as a result, many elders currently cannot read or write the language. As you can imagine, this impacts the communication between the elders and younger generations. There are 4 different dialects across Navajo Nation. They're essentially broken up by region within the nation, but it's not a clear cut, nor is it universal throughout different sections. The dialects do impact accents, words, and expressions spoken by Navajo people.
So now we're going to show you guys an introduction video to tonal.
It turns out that in some languages out there, people sing when they speak. So how does that work? When you think of the sounds that you put together to make a word, vowels and consonants come to mind. And that's good, usually. But to build words in tonal languages like Hausa or Mandarin, you need another set of musical pieces called tones to make meaning. Yes, these languages pay attention to higher and lower notes, like a singer or musician would. They don't do this by requiring their speakers to have perfect pitch and hit the same notes as everyone else every time. Not everyone who speaks your language will be a mezzo-soprano after all. So if it's not about the specific notes, how do tonal languages use so many tones? They pay attention to changes in pitch. A syllable sung higher, ha, can mean something different than that same syllable sung lower, ha. Linguistically, we would count these as 2 different tones. Whether you're high, low, or just right in the middle, you're contrasting steady notes. These different pitches are called register tones. In the Bantu languages of Africa and Athabascan languages like Navajo, the 2 basic register tones are a high tone and a low tone. Changes in pitch can get more dynamic, rising, falling, bouncing, or staying level like they do in Mandarin or Vietnamese. These tones are more about the shape of the tone, not simply whether the note stays higher or lower, so they're called contour tones. In Mandarin, a syllable can be pronounced in 4 different contour tones. In Thai, there are 5 contour tones. Think you've mastered register versus contour tones? Well then, combine them. Mandarin may have 4 contour tones, but look to the south to see how Cantonese distinguishes a low rising tone from a medium rising tone. Oh, and it also has a high level tone, which is different from a medium level tone, and a low level tone. Add in that low falling tone, and you've got 6 ways to sing a Cantonese syllable. Notice that both register and contour tones are sung on vowels. Consonants have your tongue blocking, smacking, or pushing the airflow around, unlike the smooth, vibrating air characteristic of vowels, which makes them the perfect environment for sing-songy tones. Tones are an extra feature that tonal languages use to build words. Rising, level, and falling are as distinct as P, T, and K, so speaking a word in the wrong tone in one of these languages can sound as bad as putting a K where it doesn't belong. This makes tonality a notoriously difficult feature to pick up for people coming from a non-tonal language like English. Much sympathy, my friend. So keep your ears alert and practice, practice, practice. Thanks again for learning with me, and subscribe for language.
So we're going to go back to some of the information in the video just watched later in the slides. But to start off, we're going to talk about Navajo phonology. So sounds of the Navajo alphabet can be represented by up to 3 characters. So we think about this in contrast to the English language, where sounds are represented by just 1 character, and then later combined with multiple characters to blend sounds. Navajo words consist of vowels, consonants, and tones. So again, vowels and consonants are not what are determining meaning, but the tones of how words are said. So as you saw in the video, tones can be high and low, and rising and falling. So rising and falling would be going from a low tone to a high tone, and falling would be going from a high tone to a low tone. So short vowels and diphthongs, which are 2 vowels in a single syllable, are high or low. And then long vowels and vowel clusters are that rising and falling that go either from high to low or low to high. Diacritical marks tell readers how to pronounce words and where to place emphasis. So again, because we're using a tonal language, it's important to know what phonemes are high and what phonemes are low, pertaining to the meaning of the word. Navajo language relies heavily on affixes. So verbs receive the majority of affixation in Navajo language. Individual morphemes are difficult to segment once they are fused with these multiple affixes. So one of the more interesting points of the morphology of the Navajo language is that there are very few suffixes and instead a lot of prefixes. So verbs in the Navajo language can receive up to 8 prefixes indicating number, grammatical gender, transitive properties, word order, and parts of speech. And a lot of times these affixes, whether they are prefixes or suffixes, determine word order, which in the next slide we're going to talk about syntax. So these are just a few of the major points when comparing the syntax of English and Navajo. So in English, a simple sentence order would be, a simple word order in a sentence would be subject, verb, object. And in Navajo, we would have subject, object, verb. So a good example of this is Michael will play the piano. So that would be the English syntax order. And then if we switched it to Navajo, it would be Michael, the piano, will play. So that just sort of breaks down overall syntax differences between the 2 languages. Also, in English, we think of prepositions. So prepositions typically go before objects. In Navajo, though, because of the reverse word order, instead of having prepositions, we have what are called postpositions. So these words go after the object. Also, recent studies posit that Navajo has a more unpredictable word order than historically cited. So even though we have this general concept of subject, object, verb, again, thinking back to the affixes are really what determine the word order and the overall message. And now we're going to talk about the semantics of the Navajo language. So again, going back to the video and thinking about how in tonal languages, tones determine meaning, instead of having an instead of focusing on a sentence as a whole, it's really these individual tones that determine what a speaker's message is. So, changes in pitch are significant in the Navajo language, and it's a lot about being able to slide your voice up and down from the high and low tones. So in Navajo, it's important, instead of being fluent and talking quickly, to vocalize slowly and produce these tones correctly, as small differences in tones can completely change the meaning of a word. And another cultural point to bring up is that this tonal languages in general can be difficult for those with hearing difficulties, and we think of older populations who naturally a lot of times lose their hearing abilities. So it can be particularly difficult and important to make sure that messages are clearly stated so that listeners are getting the correct message.
So moving into a little bit about the nonverbal communication used for Navajo speakers. Direct eye contact is seen as inappropriate, especially with elders. It's more common in general to look in the direction of someone rather than directly at them. This comes into play, we'll talk a little later about in the classroom and how that can change the dynamic of the teacher-child relationship. The role of silence is also important to be noted. It's a very common aspect of communication for not only Navajo speakers but Native American in general. It can indicate a variety of meanings, so the context again that we've talked about in the wording, but also listening for that silence can be a sign of respect, or it can be used for emphasis, it can be used for disapproval, or simply a sign of enjoying the company of another person present. Again, this can come into play in a classroom setting, rather than a child maybe not answering because they don't know. It could be part of their cultural background. A third area is to look at time. Time is very relative, so rather than being judged by looking at your watch or clock, instead it's based on nature and need. These conversations, we'll talk again a little more, conversations aren't ended just because time has run out, but instead the conversation can continue until everybody has had a chance to say what needs to be said. So in conversation, the speaker who initiates the conversation is not actually the person who controls the conversation. Rather, that goes back to the responder. This is seen both in the word choice of the response along with the time between turn taking. So typically the speaker indicates they're done speaking before a listener becomes the speaker. But even when this has been indicated, there might be a pause in between, or the word choice, the way somebody chooses to answer a question, can indicate the direction of the conversation. Some cultural norms that come into play here: it is typically deemed inappropriate to ask direct questions to a person that you do not know very well or an elder. Rather, you ask more general questions, and it allows the responder to take control of the conversation and answer however they see fit. It's also very uncommon to elaborately praise or discipline a child in public. It's something that is valued to do that in a quieter, more private setting. Additionally, there tends to be an underuse of greetings, farewells, and expressions of gratitude. This is very different than what we typically see in a classroom setting, especially when you have a child who has done a really sufficient job. If they've mastered a concept, praise, whether it's verbal or stickers or whatever the teacher is using, this is common. But in Navajo culture, it's more of an implied gesture that's used to express what has happened. Some classroom implications. We've talked a bit about this, but it's important for teachers to note the differences in attentiveness for these students. in terms of teachers understanding when children are paying attention rather than inaccurately assuming that they are not paying attention. This goes back to, again, the eye contact, the way attention is being given to the teacher from the student, and also in the time between responding to questions or communication in general.
And another important classroom implication, again, focuses on the tonal versus non-tonal complications. So again, English being a non-tonal language. And we think particularly in Navajo, children acquire phonemes at an older age. Again, thinking about the complexity of sounds and the high and low tones. So teachers need to be mindful of differences in language acquisition among students in the class, especially if the children are younger. Navajo speakers may have a simpler vocabulary due to their natural progression of language acquisition and the later expected age of mastery. So another implication we wanted to point out is that use of songs might be a good strategy to use in practice, as songs may be beneficial for Navajo speakers as they relate to that tonal piece again. So tonal languages are very musical, and teachers could use this to help teach Navajo speakers about the pronunciation and pace of English words and sentences. And now we're going to finish up talking about just some anticipated difficulties for Navajo speakers learning the English language. So just some important final reminders. Again, the role of tone in word production. For Navajo language, tone dictates the defined meaning of a single word. And in English, tone of voice dictates meaning of a phrase. So to break that down a little bit, in English, the tone of voice, the register, all pieces of the pragmatics of English really indicate to a listener what the speaker is trying to portray in their message. And instead in Navajo, the tones pertaining to high and low of a single word are what are really defining that meaning. So it's going to be important for teachers to work with native Navajo speakers on these pragmatic pieces of English so that they can get accustomed to the meaning of sentences and phrases. And again, just listening for those sound combinations in Navajo language, sound combinations are what are portraying overall meaning. So reminding those sensitivities and differences will be important for the success of Navajo speakers to learn and master English language.
So that wraps up our presentation on the Navajo language, and we thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to message us and check out our handout. Thank you.